that, and what I wanted to start doing was, now that version 12 had been released, I wanted to start focusing a little bit more in depth on how these new features can benefit your application and your environment in general. So that's what we're going to cover today. So as usual, there's the Oracle standard safe harbor statement that I'm required to share with you, basically explaining the fact that in the event that I discuss any future dates or features for the context of this session, that information really is just for informational purposes. It's not any kind of a commitment to those dates or features because they are all subject to change. However, generally, we do our best to follow through with those things that we plan. So kind of keep that in mind. I am going to rifle through quite a lot of information, and I'm going to try to do that inside of the 45 minutes or so that I had mentioned I'm going to cover. So I'm going to go a little quickly. If I happen to go too quickly, feel free to kind of jot yourself down a question along the way, and hopefully we'll catch up with it on the back end. And then if for any reason I cannot answer any of those questions, we'll collect them up and we'll respond to you separately after the session. So we're going to talk about a little bit of a fun thing. We're going to do a little fact or fiction just to kind of dispel some rumors that were floating around. Again, I want to just touch on some of the new features that we delivered in version 12. And then most importantly for this session, I want to talk about two specific features that were released in 12. The first one being the browserless options, or the ability to deploy without a browser, as well as some of the other browser included options. We're going to briefly touch on some of the reporting options using Oracle Reports and/or BI Publisher. And then we'll take a look at what the future may or may not bring, and we're going to talk very briefly on what Oracle's expectation is of its users of the product. So let's rifle through some of this. So this is a pretty common one that I hear often. You know, my Oracle Forms applications look old and ugly and dated. You know, what should I do? Should I throw it away and start all over? What's the story? Why do my applications look old? Well, the truth is, Oracle Forms applications don't necessarily look old by the fact that you're using Oracle Forms. Your Oracle Forms applications look dated simply because you likely haven't gone in and updated the code in 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years. So as part of the message that we've been delivering over the past few years, we want to make sure that everyone understands that with Forms, you have full control over your application. As a process of upgrading, we will not, in most cases, change the look and feel of your application. You have sole ownership of your application, and if you want it to look modern and 21st century, that ownership is entirely on you. And our part of it will be that we'll do the best we can to deliver features and functionality to allow you to do that as most appropriate as possible. The next one we've heard quite a lot is with regard to Java applets and the release of Java 9 tentatively planned for next year, 2017, and this idea that Java applets would not be supported with Java 9. This too is not true. Java applets will continue to be supported with Java 9, which is planned for, as I mentioned, release for sometime in 2017, and likely will be supported for several years after that. So Java applets are going to continue to be supported for quite some time. Upgrading our application to new Forms versions is difficult. This also is not true. We've heard this quite a lot as well. Upgrading your application, or the level of effort involved in upgrading your application, is directly related to what version you're currently using. The closer you are to the current version, the easier it will be to get to the latest version. So for example, if you're already on version 11 of the product, getting to version 12 is as simple as regenerating your application with a version 12 compiler. Likely it took me longer to explain all that than it would to actually take that action. If you are on very old versions, like 6 for example, the process is basically the same. However, in that particular case, there are some cases where some application code changes will be necessary, but that's not true in all cases. So it will definitely be on a case-by-case basis as to how difficult it will be for you to move to version 12. But at any rate, moving from an older version to a newer version generally is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. New forms releases are being developed. This, in fact, is a fact. We have we have our product development team actively working literally around the world. They are working on new features and bug fixes and enhancements to existing features all the time. I am in direct contact with that development team every day throughout the course of the week, and I can tell you that they are hard at work at whatever new features and enhancements we plan on delivering going forward. So the product is healthy and moving forward at a fairly comfortable pace. One of the things I will mention is that as we do go forward, we will continue to do our best to keep the product as stable as possible and do exactly what I said earlier, which is allow you to make your upgrade process as simple as possible. So hopefully we will be able to continue doing that. Oracle Forms can be used in the cloud, true or false? Actually, that's a fact. So as of right now, if you're using version 11 or 12 of Forms, you could use Oracle's infrastructure as a service, specifically compute, to do an installation of your Forms environment in Oracle's cloud. From that cloud environment, if you choose to not install your database in the same cloud instance, you could certainly leverage Oracle's database cloud service. And shortly here in a moment, I'm going to show you how mobility potentially plays a role in leveraging cloud as well. So cloud is definitely an option for you if you happen to be on Forms 11 or 12. So with that, let's move forward and take a look at what version 12 means, at least to those that are now using it. So in version 12, we delivered a whole bunch of new features. It's estimated that if you count the new features and enhancements, we delivered somewhere upwards of about 100 new features and enhancements combined. There were approximately 50 new features delivered and loads of bug fixes compared to the previous release, version 11. So version 12 came to the table with definitely some added value and reason to consider upgrading. On this slide, basically I'm just showing 6 or 8 new features or so. There's definitely, as I mentioned, a whole bunch more which are documented in a PDF file or a PDF document available on the Forms product page. Most of the new features are also documented throughout the Forms deployment guide, but obviously they are spread out through the entire document, placed in the appropriate chapters within the document. So if you're looking for a consolidated list, the white paper I mentioned is probably your best source of information. So as I mentioned, I want to talk about the client deployment configurations. This was probably the most requested feature that we could potentially deliver, with the fear of so many browsers claiming that they would de-support plugins, which would include the Java plugin. Many of our users wanted to know, well, what options did they have going forward if the browser wasn't going to be a viable use tool for the product. So here's what we did. So with the level of concerns that were out there, for example, I mentioned the de-supporting of plugins in the browsers. For example, Google has already done that. Google no longer supports any kind of plugins except for Flash. So that was definitely a concern with many of our customers or many of our users. As I mentioned, roughly in September 2015, Google dropped support. Mozilla Firefox is tentatively planned to drop support of plugins around the March 2017 timeframe. However, they have indicated that they will continue to support plugins roughly through early 2018 through their extended support releases, if you happen to use those in your organization. Microsoft Internet Explorer is expected to continue to be available through October 2020 as long as Windows 10 is available. And extended support of that takes you out to 2025. So if you're using Internet Explorer 11, you've got quite some time ahead of you to continue using it. On those Mac platforms, unfortunately, we have not been able to get any clear information from the Apple team as to what their plans are, so that's still a little bit of an unknown at the moment. One of the other concerns is about compatibility around the various browsers, and this isn't necessarily just a Forms unique issue. I mean, this is true of any technology that you're running in a browser, whether you're running Oracle's Apex or ADF or your own homegrown HTML websites or whatever technology you used, clearly each browser handles the underlying application implementation slightly different, whether it's JavaScript handling, the handling of HTML, the handling of plugins, the handling of add-ons, whatever the case is. Browser compatibility is an ongoing problem that we're all chasing as things move more and more to the web. Then, of course, there's the complication of the compatibility between the various browser versions, plugins, and operating systems, right? Which browser version can I use with which Java version and on which platform? That also becomes a stressful point for most organizations as well. And certainly, last but not least, are the security concerns regarding each of these items as well, whether it's the plugin, the browser, or some variation of both. So given all that, on the Oracle Forms side, we made a decision to offer some fresh options that allow you some variation of browser and browser lists, and at least an option or set of options to choose various Java distributions so that you're not restricted to one particular configuration. So what you currently have as a default in version 12 and prior to version 12 is this idea of having an applet embedded in an HTML page. That, as I mentioned, will continue to be the default configuration of version 12 going forward, at least for the foreseeable future. It does fully support, as it has in the past, single sign-on. It also supports single sign-out, which is a new feature in version 12, and JavaScript integration, which was a new feature in version 11. As I mentioned, with JavaScript integration, you have the ability to integrate with related HTML applications. However, the downside to this configuration is it does require a browser and a Java plugin be installed on the client machine. The next configuration, or the first new configuration that we offered in version 12, is this idea of JNLP, or web start, embedded in an HTML page. From a look and feel point of view, it will be exactly as you've seen in the applet embedded in HTML. So from the end user point of view, if you switch to this, they would have no idea that you switched to it. Because it is basically the same, it will support single sign-on, single sign-out, and the JavaScript integration, as I mentioned. However, one of the nice things it does bring to the table is this idea that the underlying code that's sent to the client machine or the client browser is base64 encoded. And the advantage to that base64 encoding is that there is a bit of relief in startup time, or performance increase or improvement in startup time. So that's kind of a nice enhancement. Also, because the JNLP code is base64 encoded, if you have a bunch of snoopy end users that tend to want to know what's going on under the hood and they like to do things like view source on the browser, the base64 encoded JNLP being non-human readable makes their ability to do that much more difficult. Now, this is not a security feature. That base64 encoding can easily be reversed back into human readable text, so don't assume this is a security feature, but it does definitely discourage those nosy end users that want to peek around at what you've got going on. Okay. Again, I mentioned there's JavaScript integration support, so integrating with HTML pages is relatively easy. But again, one of the downsides is that it requires a browser and the Java plugin installation. So what you end up with is something that looks like this. The choice of Internet Explorer, Firefox, or Safari if you happen to be on a Mac, and the requirement to have a specific Java plugin. Okay, so those are the browser configurations, the ones that require a browser. The next two, before I get to that point, actually, let me take a mental step backwards. I wanted to show the difference between the traditional applet embedded in HTML. If you take a look at that, you could see it's all human readable. However, the JNLP embedded in HTML, you can see that roughly 99% of it is not human readable. Okay. So back to where I was going with this. The second new configuration that we delivered, which is a browserless or semi-browserless option, is the idea of adding Java Web Start. Now, what we did, for anyone that's familiar with Java Web Start, is we kind of enhanced the Java Web Start model, if you'd like to call it that, What we're doing is not in the traditional sense of Java website or web start, where a user typically would click on a link and a static file would be sent to the client machine and run Java web start. In our case, the basic behavior of our support for Java web start is very similar to how we did Applet embedded in HTML, in that the HTML that's sent to the client is created dynamically, which means that it's very easily changeable by the administrator. Similar is true here. The JNLP code that's sent to the client in this case is generated dynamically, so it's very easily managed on the server. But what we end up with is something like this. Because there is basically no browser, you have limited single sign-on support, meaning you only have the ability to single sign-on. That new feature for single sign-out will not be available here. Neither will JavaScript integration, because again, there really is no browser. Once the application starts, in this case, if you happen to use the browser to start the application, you could close the browser and the application remains unaffected because they're not really related to each other. Okay. Again, it does not support single sign-out or JavaScript integration, but the browser is, again, optional and not required. It is only required if you choose to use single sign-on. You'll notice here that your client Java options now become a set of options rather than just having the Java plugin. Here you have the option of either using the plugin, or alternatively, you could run Java Web Start with a Java Development Kit installation. And for cases where security is an issue and you don't want the plugin available to the browser, the Java Development Kit, or JDK, is a good alternative because you don't have to plug that into the browser. This would require that the applications be started manually, either from a command line or a shortcut or a custom script or whatever else you'd like to design on your own as an administrator. Okay. So again, your options now for Java Web Start look something like this. Notice that as a result of doing this, we picked up two browser options that we didn't have before, as well as the one additional Java option. We picked up Chrome and we picked up Microsoft Edge. So you can continue to run forms with all of these browsers. There was some concern about how do I run forms with Chrome or Microsoft Edge. Well, this is how you're going to do it. Okay. And last but not least is the Form Standalone Launcher. This, we're finding out, is becoming more and more popular. Honestly, I was not expecting this, but as I've made my tour around the world at the various conferences, I'm finding that many of our customers have decided to use the standalone launcher option, which I'm kind of excited about. It turned out to be much more popular than expected. But basically, this is a fully browserless option. It is completely removed from the browser. There is no way to start your application from the browser. So again, for security purposes, if there is or was concern, this is a really good choice because there's no relationship to a browser here. Basically, you're running a standalone Java application on the client. Because there is no browser, there is no support of the browser functionality that comes along with it, single sign-on, single sign-out, or JavaScript support, so you'll have to know that limitation going in. As I mentioned, it will be launched like a standard Java application, so typically by the command line. However, you certainly can create your own launching script or shortcut or your own custom executable to launch it, however you'd like to do that. And what you have here is a much longer list of Java options on the client. You could use the Java plugin installation, the Java Development Kit installation, or this one that I like the most is the server Java runtime environment, which is actually not an installation. It's just a zip file that you download from Oracle's Java website, and it's basically just a folder that you extract onto the client machine, and off you go and running. The advantage of the server JRE is that you could have multiple versions on the same machine, and because it's not actually installed on the machine, there's nothing in the registry, there's nothing in the system path. Each folder effectively is independent of the other, and the machine has no knowledge that you have various versions on your machine, and therefore, as versions of forms change, you'll be able to switch Java versions depending upon the needs. But notice again that your only requirements here are just one of those three Java installations or distributions. So 4 different options with 4 different possible sets of requirements. Certainly one of those will be suitable for various organizations. You can mix and match them. There's no reason to deliver just one. If you have a particular set of clients that prefers one over the other, or technically you just want them to use one over the other, you have complete control over that as the administrator. So that's entirely your choice. Okay. So let's take a look at some of these in a little bit more depth. If we look at Java Web Start, as I mentioned, it can be called from most browsers and or a hyperlink from a web page using HTTP, HTTPS, or a special new custom protocol that was created by the Java team for us, JNLP, which also has an equivalent JNLP-S for SSL support. And you should see those there on the left-hand side in the image. What happens when you use the new JNLP protocol is that basically the browser just hands off the entire request to the Java Web Start executable and effectively takes no action on it itself. The browser kind of just ignores the whole thing. Again, for security reasons, that's quite handy. If you don't want any traffic going from your browser out onto the network with relationship to this request, this would do that. It also helps us to overcome some other issues that we found, for example, launching from Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome. To use that JNLP protocol, you have to have Java 8 Update 92 or newer. However, I will tell you that in the early implementation, there were some issues with it. So picking up the latest version would probably be the most appropriate thing to do, which is 8 Update 112, I believe, as of today. As I mentioned, you could also launch Web Start from the command line, a script, shortcut, custom executable, or even the builder if you want, however you want to do this. From the command line, it looks something like I have depicted here. Assuming you have a Java installation that includes the Java Web Start engine, basically you just do a Java WS and pass in the URL just like you would if it was in a browser, and off it goes. If you want to launch or test with Java Web Start in the builder, all you have to do is change your runtime preferences in the builder to include a configuration that has the appropriate Web Start setup. Here's just an example. We deliver a Web Start configuration out of the box, but you certainly can create your own custom one. Okay. So here's just a snapshot. If you're wondering if I was crazy or not, can you actually run against Microsoft Edge or Chrome? You certainly can. Here's Windows 10 running a little earlier version, but it's Windows 10 running Chrome and Microsoft Edge. So it does in fact work. Lots of neat features with Java Web Start, which have absolutely nothing to do with forms. So that's kind of nice that we get to pick up some functionality that we had nothing to do with. As an example, if you wanted to so-called install a forms application on your desktop, on the user's desktop, so that it's easier, more easily accessed later, if you go into the Java control panel and click on this View button after you run the application one time, you'll get the cache viewer with an entry indicating that the application was run one time. You select it or click on it, right, turn it blue. Click on this little curvy arrow in the top, and what you'll get on the desktop is a little shortcut. That little shortcut is directly tied back to the cache, the JRE or Java cache, the plugin cache. So if you delete the cache, the desktop shortcut will go away. The next time the user wants to run the application, all they have to do is double-click on that shortcut and the application will run. Now bear in mind, if you're using single sign-on, this will not work because you, again, need the browser to get authenticated. So this will only work in cases where single sign-on is not used. Now there's a variety of other ways to get this desktop and manipulate this desktop, which I'm not going to spend too much time drilling into here. But the best way to get that information is to check out the Java documentation, where you could get all kinds of cool information about what options you have. Okay, so if you're looking for more information about JNLP and or Web Start, which is I guess kind of synonymous, checking out the Java doc is the way to go. Like I said, there's lots of cool things you could do. You could control that desktop icon that's created with that shortcut. If you want to have your own custom icon, you could do that. Again, lots of things you could do with it. So kind of neat. Okay. Let's take a look at the Form standalone launcher. This is kind of a cool one too. So again, you could call this from the command line script shortcut or custom executable or any other way that you might call a locally set up application. As you can see on the left, you're going to do this similar kind of a thing as you would do with Java Web Start, where once you pass in the argument to call the launcher, java-jar, and then the name of the jar, you're going to pass in the URL just like you would if you had a browser, and the application will run. In that fancy little Windows batch file I created there in the middle, I just added some logic to it to do things like check to see if Java is actually available on the machine. If it's not, give the user the option of pointing to where Java can be found, and do the right thing. You could get absolutely as creative as your mind takes you. And of course, as I mentioned, you could create a shortcut to do all the right thing as well, because obviously there's a lot of end users that would prefer not to be messing around with the command line. Okay. As I mentioned, with the standalone launcher, you could download any one of these server or Java distributions to do what you need it to do. So you've got plenty of options here, whichever one meets your needs best. But as I mentioned, or kept mentioning, this is running a Java application on the local client. So you do have to download a small launcher file to the client machine, which you could store anywhere you want. That's entirely up to you. And it does need to match the version that you're running against exactly. So if you're running, for example, the original production release, which was 12.1.0, that's the only version that this launcher could run against. If you're running against 12.2.1.2, then you have to have the 12.2.1.2 launcher. So they are matched up to the back-end version. Okay. There's more information delivered out of the box for you once you have the product installed and configured. If you go to /form/html/FSAL.htm, you'll get this page that I have up on the screen. And although I don't show the whole page here because there wasn't quite enough room, it does explain what the launcher is, what it requires, and some of the syntax about using it. As an administrator, if you don't want this page exposed to the end users, you're certainly welcome to edit this page or remove this page or change it in any way you want. But one of the things we did do was create a download link in it, which points back to where that file is located, that launcher file. I kind of encourage you to do the same if you do decide to use your own page. Okay. And when you run with the launcher, again, it's very similar to running Java Web Start. On the left, I left open the shell where I spawned it off from. And on the right, you could see the running form. Now, in this particular case, this is a Linux desktop. I could have just as easily done this on Windows or Mac. So virtually any platform that will run Java, you could run forms on. Okay. If you look very carefully, and I didn't necessarily do this intentionally, but if you look very carefully at the version number mentioned in there, 12.2.1.3. 12.2.1.3 is not available yet to the public, but we are working on it. Hopefully it will be available sometime in 2017. So as I mentioned, development is very actively working on the product. So some things you need to know about the standalone launcher. As I mentioned, it does use the Java executable. So if you're interested in getting really creative with that Java executable, rather than diving into the forms documentation, you probably need to dive into the Java documentation. If you're looking for troubleshooting information or how do I increase the amount of memory available to the JVM that's hosting my application, that kind of stuff, that will all come from the Java documentation as it has nothing to do with forms. So you could get pretty creative there if you're Java savvy. The launcher does not provide any file-based logging, so if you are in a position where you have to do some troubleshooting and the contents of the shell is either not available to you, maybe because the window crashes or whatever the case is, or maybe you just want to track the information, the best suggestion we have at the moment is to redirect the output of that terminal window to a text file. Whether you're on Windows or Unix or even Mac for that matter, it's relatively easy to do. This example I have here shows how to do it on Windows. Right, you just add the redirect or greater than symbol and then the name of the file at the end, and it will redirect the output of the shell out to a text file. I know I said that browsers were not supported, but what I was referring to was the launching of the application through a browser is not supported. Commands in your application that launch a browser, like web.show document, are supported. They will work exactly the same as they did in the past. So if you're integrating with, I don't know, Oracle Reports or BI Publisher or whatever the case is, and browsers have to get spawned, that will work exactly the same way as it did before. The one thing I did not mention regarding all these configurations, I did but blurred over it, is that in no way are we changing the way your application looks or feels. All we're changing is whether or not you're using a browser. So if you're wondering, ooh, does my reports integration still work? Well, it absolutely does. Nothing changes with regard to your application and what it does. We're only changing what's containing your form when it starts. Okay. If you do need to use SSL, as I mentioned, we're running this local Java application as a Java application. So in order to do that, the Java installation that is hosting that application needs to have the SSL certificate. So you would have to import that into the key store on the client Java machine, or the client machine. Not dissimilar to what you would do if you had a browser. Okay. And again, if you need more information about the Java command, that is also in the Java documentation on the Oracle website. Some additional settings that we delivered with these browserless options. Again, some more new features for version 12. Again, this only applies to the browserless solutions. We added an always on top feature. This is pretty common on a Windows platform. However, with Java, you could do this on any platform, which is kind of neat. So let's say, for example, you have a very important forms application, or maybe you want something that resembles like kiosk mode, where you can't get windows from the background into the foreground. You want forms to always be on the top. You don't want users messing around with what's behind it. That's what this would do. Center on startup, I don't know if anyone's ever thought about it, but when you start a forms application, even separate frame equals true, the separate frame always starts in the top right hand, or excuse me, the top left hand corner. This center on startup will cause a Java web startup or the form standalone launcher startup to start in the middle of the screen, centered like a bullseye, or at least as close to center as possible. So that's just more of an aesthetics thing than anything else. And we also added an is resizable option. That's talking about the parent window, the so-called MDI window. There are cases where you have your application designed to be a specific size, and you do not want the user to start resizing that parent window. Setting this will prevent the user from being able to stretch out that parent window, including using the maximize button. That will not work either. Programmatically, you can change the size of the window, but the user will not be able to do that. Okay. These three new applet parameters do require 12.2.1.1 or newer. They were not all available in 12.2.1.0. Two of them were actually, one of them was not. I don't remember exactly which ones, but your best bet is to be on .1 or newer anyway. Okay. We are working on some additional ones for future versions. Hopefully we'll be able to get those in the next release. If not, we'll add them to the following release. Okay. For more information on those client deployment options, again, like the new features, we did add a PDF or white paper onto the Forms product page with a little bit more detail than what I've described here. So if any of those new configurations are of interest to you, I kind of recommend you take a look at that document. Okay. So I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about reporting. I don't know if anyone has been made aware of it yet or not, but Oracle Reports has been publicly announced as being deprecated. Keep in mind that deprecated does not mean desupported. It just simply means that we have no plans on doing any new development to Oracle Reports, and likely we will not deliver it after the release of 12.2.1.3, which is again planned for sometime in 2017. So likely the .3 release will be the last time we roll out Oracle Reports. So because of that, what we did was, let's actually do it this way. Let's actually cover reports first. So with reports, you had that similar design interface like you do forms. The builder looks kind of similar. The basic look and feel and functionality works the same. right? It's built into a familiar architecture. It's obviously been in the developer tools family for a long time, so I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. And it does come as part of the installation of forms, at least currently. We added or introduced BI Publisher into the mix. Although we do not install BI Publisher with the forms installation, we do now have native integration with it. It is a component of OBI-EE, or Oracle Business Intelligence Enterprise Edition. And it does have a more modern web-based design interface, which is kind of neat. It's kind of a drag and drop kind of environment in a web page. You can also create your templates or the layout of your reports in Microsoft Word with BI Publisher. And the design of your reports are pretty modular, so you could get pretty crazy and mix and match layouts with data models and even translation. So that's kind of nice as well. But probably one of the coolest features, at least from my point of view, is this last one, where you have this ability to deliver to many destinations at the same time when you run the report. This really has nothing to do with integration with forms, but I do think it's an interesting feature that BI Publisher offers. The idea that you could run a report either directly or from forms and have that resulting output be sent out to an email to the entire company, and at the same time have it also go to a printer, and maybe you want a copy of it sent to an FTP server, and maybe you want a copy to go to a content server, or whatever the case is. You could send it to multiple destinations all upon completion of creating the output. So that's kind of a nice feature of BI Publisher. To actually do this integration inside of forms, this is specific to version 12, as I mentioned. It's relatively easy and relatively similar to using Oracle reports. So if you are familiar with using Oracle reports, this will all be basically the same. The first thing you're going to do is create a report object in forms. Again, same thing as you would do for integrating with Oracle reports. You're going to see a new report object type in your property palette here. Instead of it saying Oracle reports, in this case, you're going to select Oracle BIP or BI Publisher. Because we use BI Publisher's web services functionality, you're going to have to tell the forms application where to find the BI Publisher web service. And then just like you would do in Oracle reports, you're going to have to tell forms where to find the report that you want to run. One of the requirements you're going to have with BI Publisher integration is that you have to programmatically set the username and password for BI Publisher. You cannot do that declaratively, and we did that intentionally for security reasons. In this particular example, the form that this came from actually has two text fields set up as a standard username and password type of a field. So we get those values and we set those programmatically. And then you call the report. And that's pretty much it. It's pretty straightforward. It's not very complicated at all. However, let's go into a little bit more of a realistic approach. So here's a little bit more extensive code. Obviously, this isn't production code by any means, but it will give you a better idea of what the code would look like. As I mentioned, the first thing you're going to want to do is set the password. You're then going to do run report object to request the report. It's at this time that the request will go out to BI Publisher, so hopefully before you got to this point, you will have set whatever other properties you wanted, for example, the destination and location of report and all that stuff I showed you in the builder. Upon requesting the report, we'll get back a job ID and or a status. We want to make sure that that actually took place and we didn't get some crazy null value back or whatever. If it did, then obviously something went wrong. We want to take that status and then start to prepare to do something with it. In this case, we're going to check to make sure that the report, as far as BI Publisher is concerned, is in a scheduled running or active state, meaning it's busy, it received the request, and it's doing something with it. In this particular example, just for the sake of demonstration, I created a timer for 10 seconds. In production, you probably are not going to want to do that. You may want to check for your report every minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depending upon the report. Obviously, you could programmatically change that as needed. And then, as I mentioned, you're going to want to check periodically with the BI Publisher server to find out what the status of the report is. The calls from forms are asynchronous, So there's really no other way to do this other than to periodically go back and check the BI Publisher server. So what I did here was in a when timer expired trigger, I checked to find out what the status is. Is the status still in a scheduled state, or is it running, or did it succeed? If it succeeded, then obviously it's finished. If in fact it did finish, I'll go ahead and delete the timer and then do something. Maybe I'll do a web show document to display it, depending upon how I configured the BI server. If I provided an email address, maybe I want to inform the user that, hey, you should be receiving your email shortly, or whatever the case is, depending upon how you created the application. And in a case where something went miserably wrong and the status that you got back doesn't look like running, success, or scheduled, you could assume something failed, and you'll probably want to let the end user know something didn't go right, and you'll want to delete the timer and do the right thing. That's kind of a high-level view of how you'd want to implement that. That is somewhat described in the new features document that I mentioned. However, we are working on authoring a full paper that covers BI Publisher integration, and hopefully we'll offer some copy and paste code examples in there, similar to how we did the and what you'll end up once that BI Publisher report runs and is available to you is hopefully a nice, pretty report the way you've imagined it. Okay. So going forward, what is the world bringing us? Well, if you came from yesteryear, you probably have or have had a data center that looks something like this disaster. Wires strung out everywhere, servers stretched out across the floor, air conditioners plugged into the walls, all kinds of crazy stuff from old school, right? Well, in the new world, cloud is where it's at. Maintaining data centers and worrying about having to deal with the hardware throughout the course of the night and day is kind of a thing of the past. Leveraging cloud definitely gives you the advantage of not having to mess around with all that. So what you want your data center to look like is something more like this, a web page, where when you need more memory, with a click of a button, you could add memory. If you need more CPU, you click a button and add CPU. If you need new disk storage, you click a button and add new disk storage. No more shutting machines down, adding storage, and starting over, wasting lots of time. So lots of advantage to moving to cloud. I'm not going to go too much into that, but I encourage you to take a look at what cloud offerings are out there. Definitely can make your life a little bit easier. But from a forms point of view, let's take a look at what that means. As I mentioned earlier, you certainly can use cloud today if you're on a newer version of forms. At the moment, your only option is to use infrastructure as a service or compute. In this particular depiction of an option, the middleware installation and the database are installed together. You could certainly do that. However, the use of this type of an option is really going to depend on the level of load you expect on this. Right? If you're only going to have 100 users on this, that's going to be much different than if you're going to have 100,000 users on this type of a configuration. If you want to scale it out a little bit, you have this kind of an option. Right? You could leverage database as a service, which in addition to providing you the database, offers you a bunch of other functionality unique to database cloud service. If you really want to reach out into the future, you could have an arrangement that looks something like this. Oracle partner OraPlayer, who graciously hosted this call, offers a product that allows you to expose your forms business logic or process logic as web services. Those web services can then be leveraged to develop new front ends, whether they be mobile applications or even new desktop applications. You'll have the ability to leverage your existing forms application through various other interfaces, whether, again, being mobile or new desktop applications. With Mobile Cloud Service that I have up here on the right, by routing those web services through Mobile Cloud Service, you could then take advantages of the features that Mobile Cloud Service offers, things like push notifications, for example. Definitely a way to get into the 21st century without reinventing the wheel. You probably have a lot of investment and time and money in your forms application. This is a great way to get into mobile very quickly without starting from scratch and spending a whole lot of time and money. And we'll leave Mia to talk about some of that. Okay. The path forward for forms looks something like this at the moment. I won't go through these in too much detail, but the point is we've got a lot of new features and enhancements we're looking at going into the versions forwards. We're looking at ways to improve usability in cloud, new UI enhancements, administrative tool improvements. We're always looking at improving performance and the client configuration options that we just delivered. We have a whole bunch of new features we're working on for it, as well as performance improvements. So there's lots of good things on the horizon all across the product stack. So I'm really excited about what's coming in the next year or so. So lots of good stuff in the works. So if you're not already on version 12, I kind of encourage you to at least get on a newer version of whatever it is you are using, because as I mentioned, it's going to be much easier to upgrade to the latest version depending upon how close you are to it. Okay. So what we're expecting from you as the users of the product, and this is really not version specific, this has kind of been the norm for years. We kind of hope that as an organization you have an upgrading and or patching schedule written into your normal routine at your organization. I understand the pain points involved in doing that. However, it is very important for a whole bunch of reasons. Ensuring ongoing support is probably not the most important, but one of the most important. Making upgrading easier to the next release, as I mentioned a minute ago. And also the ability to pick up new features and enhancements. But the one thing I didn't mention here is the idea of picking up the latest security enhancements, right? So ensuring that you're patching frequently will help to ensure that your system is as secure as possible. Now that you've consumed the new version or new patch and you've exposed some of the new features inherently, we'd like for you to take just a few minutes and take a look at the documentation for that new version and consider those new features that potentially you would have to implement manually. For example, those that require configuration changes or code changes. I know in many cases organizations say, no, my application's been stable for 20 years. We don't want to touch the code. I encourage you to, at bare minimum, take a look at the documentation. A lot of the features we delivered in version 12 are effectively no code changes, basically enabling external environment variables or applet parameters, and you pick up the new feature. We also delivered features that literally require one line of code, as well as other features that are a little bit more complex, for example, like BI Publisher integration. So lots of different options, lots of different ways to implement. I really encourage you to take a look at what's available. Don't just upgrade for the sake of upgrading. Make it worth the effort. The results of incorporating new features and upgrading and patching, of course, user efficiency and productivity goes up. The user acceptance to the application goes up. Instead of saying they hate the application, they might actually start to like it. And of course, data accuracy and security are improved by making sure that you're current as well. And of course, really last, certainly not the least important here, is the fact that as you go forward trying to make a decision for your organization or participate in that decision making, remember that you have a toolbox at your hands. You don't work through one tool. So if, for example, there's a decision on the table to rewrite a forms application in some other technology, remember that you may not have any need to do that. If you have new business requirements, consider what those requirements are and choose the appropriate tool. If forms happens to be the appropriate tool to complete the task, then use it. If it's not, then don't. But by all means, don't consider throwing away a long-built investment simply to gain a piece of functionality that you may have as a new requirement. That seems to be a common theme. We have a lot of customers asking, what should we replace forms with in an effort to pick up mobile, for example. As I mentioned, ORAplayer is certainly an option for picking up mobile, and you won't have to change a single line of your forms code, and your desktop users won't even know that you transitioned and added mobile to your environment. So there's definitely a lot worth reviewing. Okay. I wanted to mention this. This is an important one. Speaking of mobile, if you'll notice the section at the top of this graph, the green section, that represents, if I understand the graph correctly, the amount on average time spent by people around the world that have mobile on a given day, right? So for example, in 2015, the claim is that on average there's 2.8 hours a day spent on a mobile device and so on through the list. Notice the increase, right? That kind of represents the number of users on the increase and the amount of time they're spending on the increase. So clearly mobile is here to stay. Everyone is moving to it in one form or another, whether it's internally in an enterprise or externally as customers or your children at home. Mobile is clearly here. But more important to me as the Forms Product Manager is this part of the curve. Notice that the blue section represents the desktop users. For approximately the past 7 years, at least according to this graph, desktop use has remained basically the same. So what that tells me is desktop use is not going down as a result of mobile. Mobile has just become an extension to desktop. So thinking that you want to replace your desktop applications with mobile might not be the entirely right choice. What you need to be thinking about is how do I extend my desktop application with mobile so that my desktop application becomes better. And clearly, moving to mobile is going to make your desktop application better because your users will be able to work more productively when they're not at their desk. But when they are at their desk, they're going to need their desktop application, and that's where Forms comes in. So that's an important one. Interesting quote. Predictions are difficult, especially about the future. Yogi Berra. So for those of you that follow baseball, you'll know who Yogi Berra is. I won't go into detail on that. But that's an interesting quote because it's really so true. We have no idea what tomorrow brings, but we're going to prepare as best we can while we're here. And with that, I take you to contact information. If you have any questions about the Forms product, I recommend you take a look at the Forms product page. It's updated somewhat regularly. Also, there's the Forms forum on OTN, which I moderate and monitor on a regular basis, usually multiple times a day. If you have questions, comments, concerns, or just are willing to share your time with other people that have questions or concerns, please feel free to participate there. Participation is what makes it work, so I encourage everybody to at least take a look at it periodically. Of course, there's Oracle support if you need it. We've got a great support team. For those of you that know me, I spent 13 years on support, so I still consider myself part of the support family. I know them all very well, and they do a great job over there. And of course, we've got a Twitter account. If you're looking for the latest and greatest on what's going on, feel free to jump on and follow me on Twitter. Next week, I'll be in the UK in Birmingham, England, for the UK user group, so you'll probably see a lot of traffic on Twitter regarding what's going on throughout the course of the conference. And with that, I will turn it back over to Mia. I think we've got just a couple of minutes here for some questions.
Yes,
Mia,
I see.
There you go.
Starting to write questions in the question box, so we're doing some answers. But Michael, thank you so much for all that information. I'm sure it's a lot to process. I see people already asking us if the slides are going to be available. So we will be making the slides available as well as the recording of this session available. So anybody who wants it could feel free to email us at info@auraplayer.com and we'll send that right out. And it'll also be sent to the participants. So that'll be no problem to get you guys the information if you need a review of it if it came at you a little bit fast. But that's what's kind of incredible about Oracle Forms and about what Michael's been able to achieve is kind of breathing new life into the product, not only just, switching the version number from 10 to 11 to 12, but really pushing the bar and getting us new features and new functionality and really thinking about how to, leverage our investment and move the product forward. So we're very excited to partner with Oracle and bring that modernization forward, specifically in the mobile world and the web application world. But Michael's doing incredibly exciting things. If there's any other questions, feel free to put them in the question box, but we're also available after the fact if you guys have questions you want to email us. Michael, I see here another question to you. With the limited SSO with JWS, how will resource access descriptors work?
That's a good question. However, the good thing is nothing will change. So the resource access descriptors will work exactly the same way as they did before. What will happen is just like your used to. When you request the form in the browser, you'll be redirected to single sign-on. You'll be authenticated through single sign-on. If the remote access descriptor doesn't exist, you'll be redirected to the creation of the RAD page. There's a create RAD page, I guess is what it's called. You'll create the remote access descriptor, and once it's successfully created, the application will run. And actually, interestingly enough, if the remote access descriptor is not successfully created, the form will still run. However, what will happen is you'll be presented with the default dialog box for username and password. So everything will continue to run exactly as it did before. So as I mentioned, the fact that you're running Java Web Start really doesn't change the behavior of the application. You would see that same exact behavior if you were still in a browser.
Okay, great. So thank you all for joining us. And if there's no other questions, we will say farewell to all of you. Happy for you all to join us on our other webinars. We have Grant Ronald, the Oracle Mobile Product Manager, doing a session on Oracle Forms to Mobile and Back Office No Longer. And we're also going to be doing one on Oracle EBS and modernizing your UI called Why Do You Look So 90s? Modernizing the look and feel of Oracle Forms and EBS. You can find both of those on the Aura Player website on the Events tab. So thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you all soon. And thank you again, Michael, so much for your support in doing these webinars for our Oracle Forms community.
Great, you're welcome. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending.